Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about my template. This is a little bit of a last minute video, kind of a quick video to still get something out this week because I've been sick over the week. So I wasn't feeling that well, I wasn't as productive as I wanted to be, and therefore I decided to switch up the topic. This was a video that I was planning on making because I've done one last year and a lot has changed about my template and the way I work. So I'm going to go both over the template itself, but also the why I do it and the reasons behind it and kind of the workflow explanations for the choices that I've made getting into the template. So yeah, quickly that you know, the other video that I was planning is still going to be on. That's going to be next week's video. It's going to be about mid-side processing, and I think it's going to be a very interesting video because I've actually found some plugin developers that I've been talking to, and they're kind of explaining to me how it works inside the plugin, how you would actually go about programming something like mid-side processing within the plugin, the different approaches, and as well just showing me code of how it is done. So I actually have a very interesting segment, I think, of using code to actually show you, to get you an idea of what a plugin is doing behind the scenes to your signals when applying mid-side processing in different ways. So I hope you guys will find that interesting. That's also part of why it's taking so long for that video. Those kind of the longer videos that I do, those 50-minute videos, just take a little bit of time to research. And for this one in particular, it took me a little bit more because of that contacting plugin developers and everything. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to how you guys react to that video. So before we get in the video, I do want to say one final thing. There's going to be a download link for this template in the description. I would recommend you don't use it before you've seen this video, because a lot of the template is not going to make sense if you don't know why it's set up the way it's set up. So do keep watching, even if you decide to download the template and explore it yourself later. I would highly recommend that you watch it before, so you get an idea of the philosophy of the template, why I'm doing certain things the way that I'm doing them. But that's going to be it. Let's get into the video. So I'm going to jump into the video by actually opening up Ableton here live, so I can show you how the template looks directly out of opening up Ableton. So we're just starting it up here, and it's loading my template set. So getting into the template right here, if I go to my master, that's where the magic happens of really the main part of what has changed. And the big thing that has changed is that I now have, since very recently, actually have this Max for Life device here, which is Track Stats 1.0 by Tom Cousin. I'll link a video of his explanation of this particular Max for Life device in the description below. So what this does is it gives me a little bit of information about the sessions and the stuff that I've been working on. What I can do is I can enter a name here, let's say test 1 or something, and then that will be my project. I don't know exactly why this is currently off, why the session time and the session time here is different from it just starting up. It's something I would need to look into. Maybe it's because of the way this is saved in terms of already working on the template, but that's okay. What this is there to be is just for me to kind of get a feel for how long I've been working on a track, as well as having these decibel meters here, which are very useful, as well as devices and tracks, and maybe even length is something that is interesting, but mainly devices and tracks. The reason for that is because recently in my productions I've been hitting kind of the CPU ceiling of what my computer can handle at the moment, and optimizing your projects by removing devices or tracks if possible is a good way to just make sure that you can finish a production without running into any CPU issues. Other than that, on my mastering chain I have a bunch of different analyzers. I have this analyzer here, which is the Spectrum, which comes with Ableton. I like this analyzer very much for like finding keys. As you can see there, it has a little window where it says the key and the frequency, as well as the decibel. So for very specific, like looking up values, if I ever need to look up at the key of a bass line in a different track, I can just home in on the exact point where the bass line is playing. I can actually show that if I take one of my own tracks here. I can see the bass notes that are playing here. I can see the exact key, right? G1 here, and then with A sharp 1. And I can use that to determine the key of the track, or the key of the particular sound that I'm listening to. And that's just very useful. So that's the reason why that's on the master. Other than that, I have 3 monitors on my computer. So here we have Analyzer's third mon, which stands for third monitor. These are already set up for me to open up on the third monitor here. And I'll quickly show you how this setup would look on my third monitor then. They're kind of like loosely aligned because they're different plugin windows, obviously. But this plugin is called Signalizer, and it's a really powerful analyzer, which can, as you can see, 4 types of different analyzers. Right, you can see what we have. We have a waveform, we have a spectrum here, again being useful for the key as well as other things. And we have a stereo here to get the stereo field, as well as averages of banding, as well as stereo width. And then we have a waterfall display to check for phase issues. So that's one of the things that I have on my master. And then the final thing here is my multi-analyzer. And in this case, it's going to be on the master track. So usually what I'll do is I'll turn these off for this master instance. So I have the master here, and I can use these different analyzers, one of which is this collision, which is really cool. I can see if different drums or different tracks collide with each other in the frequency range. As you can see here, we have a frequency range, and it will show you kind of a heat map of which frequencies are played most. And based on that, it will show you where collisions occur between those different layers. So these layers here are all instances of this particular plugin. I'll place it here so you can actually see. And I can like turn them on and off with these buttons here. So this is really powerful again in mixing. You can also see the different waveforms. Now nothing is playing through it, but you can imagine the different waveforms of the drums, the waveform of the bass line, the waveform of the leads, as well as the stereo image of all of those things. The oscilloscope, which is not really that useful for me. But I mainly use collisions, loudness, because this is a really nice loudness meter. I can also pause this, which is something you cannot do with the Signalizer stuff. And the last thing is the spectrogram, which is also very useful. In that case, do turn off normalization, otherwise it will normalize each individual spectrum, and it will be hard to determine the relative volumes between the different elements that you have in your track or that you're trying to monitor. So those are all my main analyzers that I have on my master. There are analyzers on other tracks as well. For example, there should be one here somewhere. Or at least here there's these other instances of the M multi-analyzer, which I talked about before. These instances are mainly here just so that I have the instances show up in here. Because every little thing here that shows up here is an instance of this plugin. And you can just select all, select none, and play around with the different analyzers and turn them on or off or whatever. And through that you can have you know, an analyzer for all your bass stuff, an analyzer for all your drums, an analyzer for all your lead sounds, and then just compare the different things to each other. So that's this group. This routing group is purely here for those analyzers. And the way I've been working, as you can see, all these groups go into their individual tracks here. So this drums group goes into the drums track, which then goes into the master out track right here, which is my track which houses my master chain. I'll talk a little bit about this output section here as well later. But the reason why I want to show you why this is done this way is it's 2 reasons. One, it's just organization. I like to have these analyzers here, and having them in this own little group, in their own little thing, allows me to be a little bit more organized. I don't have to have plugins on these groups here, which I really don't like processing all my drums. Even if it's not really processing them, it just kind of feels wrong to have plugins on a group of all the drums or all the leads. There's not really an effect that I would like to apply to all of my leads or all of my drums. And that includes, you know, just psychologically being able to see that this is empty and has nothing on that. I don't have to worry about it. The second thing why this is actually, and this is a much bigger idea, is I can go into my projects. Let me open up a project here. So as you can see, if I go into the project, you can already see one that I have all these groups here that I can just use. I can drag in all the drums from a different project and maybe start writing using the drums for a different project if I want to. So as you can see, all the drums are now here, and the only thing I'll usually have to do in these kind of projects is just make sure that they go to the right group. And then already, even though this is in a completely different drums group than the other drums that might be in the project, they already go through both the metering for the drums as well as the master chain. I don't have to set any other routing up. So it's basically drag and drop and just make sure that this routing is set correctly, and then it just works. So that's really nice. You might recall that I used to have this basically same setup if you've seen the old template video of mine. And the main difference was then I was using return tracks. But I found out with some plugins, mainly on the master chain, what I've been doing lately is, if I turn this off and go to, let's say, the plugin that I use for this is usually Boost. So this is a plugin I've also been featuring on my channel. What I'll do is I'll set this amount and I'll like automate it through the track. So let's actually use this waveform as an example to show you what I mean. So what I'll do is I'll usually have something like this where towards the drop, just to make it a little bit more interesting, let's say the drop is right there, we'll automate it down like this, right? So that the maximizing becomes less and less towards the drop until the drop really hits, and then it starts playing at full maximization again. This is just a trick that I do during mastering usually, but I'll often have my preliminary master done on the track already. I've talked about this in the last video on staying creative is one of the tricks that I use, is trying to get to a finished product as soon as possible. And having a preliminary master, an early master, really helps there. And this is often something that I already do kind of like roughly in the master. So something the way I've done it like here, where I just quickly draw in a curve to just kind of get an idea of how the dynamics would work if I was to use such a technique. So in that case, what I would often find is that the more of plugins I would add, especially plugins that add a lot of latency, like linear phase plugins, what would happen is that the effect this little curve would have and the way it's drawn would be out of sync. So for example, in this case, let's say there's a lot of plugins. You can see we're going up here from 0 to 0.20. That little hop, that little change would actually happen here. So the first 4 kicks and the first 4 notes of your bass line would still be affected by this lower part, just because they were out of sync, right? And that would happen to me with the return tracks. That was because of the return tracks. Now, in the new template, I'm using this routing group, which are normal audio tracks, and they don't have that problem. So if you're still using inspiration from my last template, if you have watched that video and you're still using such a setup, I would highly recommend making a group like this if you ever have something after the group that you're automating, so that the automation doesn't desync with what's actually like shown here. So yeah, so that segues nicely into this out group here, which is something I already had in the other template, but has basically stayed the same. The reason why I have this out group is so that my reference track doesn't go through my master chain. It obviously goes through my master channel here, so it can go through all the analyzers and stuff like that, and even now through these decibel meters, which is nice and useful. But I'm actually mastering, any master plugin goes on this chain here. So everything from my project goes into this routing group, and from the routing group, every single track of these goes into the master out. So the master out, if I put any plugin here, everything that is basically in this group is going to be affected by that. So my whole project is affected by the master chain, except this reference track. And I can add more if I want to, but I have one for now, which I have a specific setup for. And the way this works is that it just goes right at 6 next to this output. So they both go directly to the master, and they don't interact with each other, right? So no audio from this master chain is going through the reference track, and nothing from the reference track is going to the master out. Another thing that is very useful in this case, and what I highly recommend you do, is have a key command that solos your reference track. And I have set it to N here, which just allows me to quickly listen to my reference track and back. So that's a very easy shortcut that I'm using. And yeah, this allows me to quickly A/B between a reference track as well as my own work. Finally, there's this little group here, which is helpers. Here we have just a few tracks that I sometimes use, sometimes not. I've talked about this marker track in, again, the video on both staying inspired as well as arrangement. And I used it there in the section about arrangement to preemptively draw in an arrangement. So what I'll usually do is something like this. When I start a project, I'll have an idea of a rough sketch of how I want the track to be in terms of the structure of it. And I'll just go in and say, like, draw the structure already. That way I don't have to worry about the structure while I'm actually writing synths, while I'm writing drum loops or bass loops or bass sounds or doing some of the mixing part. I already have in my mind the entire structure of the track, the way it's going to work. So that's very useful. The second thing is notes. If I want to make a note specifically to a specific section of a track, I'll be able to make a MIDI clip of that section and then work with that. A lot of people like to use locators for that, which are these things that you can add to the top here. If I remember correctly, somewhere here. Yeah, here. You can add a locator and then you can write down anything there and you can drag it around. I don't like it because I tend to leave a lot of notes, and with I can actually show this. If you have a lot of locators in the same area, your project is going to be a little bit of a mess if you just have too many of them. So something like this, one, you can see it on this bar, which I don't like, but if you zoom out, you can see it becomes a little bit of a mess in terms of all those lines going down. I would love to use these locators if there was an ability to turn off these lines, but I don't think there is. So for me, this isn't something that works. Instead, I have my own version of that, which is nice and easy. You can collapse them, but still be able to see it. So for example, let's say I have my marker track here. I can see, okay, I can still see the structure even if the group is collapsed. That's one of the key features of using MIDI tracks for this. But also for notes, what I could do, on black it's not really that visible. As you can see, you can't really see it, especially on my color scheme. So any important note, I will actually color it white. And then I can also see, okay, there's something that needs to happen at this specific portion of the track. If I want to fix that, that's something I want to get into, I can just open it up and read what's on the note. For those of you who saw my last video, another thing that I mentioned is that I often use like write down things physically. So I have my notebook here, right, that I've shown off the last time with all the things that I physically write down. This notes stuff is really something that I use at the start, and to maybe if I'm doing a remix or I have something in mind that I want to do later, like a key for the track or a specific BPM, but I'm not able to get to that in this particular session, then this is something I would leave in the notes track. But if I'm like finalizing it something and I need to take a lot of notes, then the notes track is not something that I like to use, because what tends to happen is that I write down so much stuff. If I were to put it on the notes track, it would overlap. So you would either need to make very small MIDI clips, and then you would need to really zoom in to read what's on the MIDI clip if you have like really long pieces of text to describe what you're trying to say, or you would need to make multiple of those tracks. So that's not really useful in that sense. So yeah, the notes track is usually for information that has to stay there for a whole project. So if I'm making a remix, I'll usually have one MIDI clip with key, BPM, the artist. If I'm working with or sampling somebody, a particular vocalist, I'll usually write down the name for that person. Maybe somebody is giving a speech, I'll leave a YouTube link from where I sampled something. and that way I can go back to it and maybe sample more if I need to. So this is something where that kind of permanent information stays, as well as information that I might need in the same session. So if I wake up in the morning and decide to do like a 4-hour session, and I want to work on the drop, but I notice quickly something in the intro that's going to take a while to fix, I'll make a note from it here, and then that's not something I'll write down on a notebook. I'll write it down directly in the project. So then there's the third chain here. This is my master recording chain. Anything that goes through, I believe, the master out, so through my master out track here gets recorded, which is really useful. And so what I can do, I can even, using a key, arm this particular track for recording, which means that anytime I have, like, maybe I'm playing a MIDI and I want to quickly record something else, I can just go up and then record it, and it will start recording the thing that I'm recording. This is really useful if you're working on projects, and I'll show this later in a full project. I want to go over like a full project, how it looks when I'm actually working on stuff. What you'll see is that I'm using this quite a lot to just analyze the waveform, and I highly recommend you have something like this where you can quickly and easily set up something to record your waveform, especially if you're working a lot on kick and bass. In that case, the waveform is very important to see. Another thing that I have, which I would recommend, but I don't have in my actual template, is if I go here, is this size scope thing. So again, talking about analyzing the waveform. This is just something I can set up where I can say, okay, this is going to be to the drums for the kick, this is going to be for the bass, for the bass line, and then this is already a setup version of size scope, which is a plugin that again shows me the waveform of my kick and bass in this case, and it has summing mode as well as showing the different layers. I don't like to have this on my template because I don't always use it. More often than not, I don't actually use it, so that's why it's not in there. But it is something that I have handy here in the group. As you can see, I have some different things, kick and sidechain trigger. I believe I have a normal sidechain as well here. The whole bunch of different tracks here, which allow me to quickly drag and drop something in there if I ever need a particular type of track. And that's just a folder in my Ableton thing, so that I have quick access to whatever kind of track that I need. Finally, there's the sidechain trigger, which comes preloaded with a sample here. As you can see, it's not the cleanest sample, but that's okay. It does the job. It's just a very short sample that I can use to trigger a sidechain. This is in all capitals, as well as very far up to the project, so anytime I have like a compressor, I can easily see it here. The only thing, if you have hundreds and hundreds of tracks, what it will do is it will actually show the tracks from bottom up, so you have to scroll up every time you click this one again. So that's a little bit annoying. I've wanted to maybe put this below so that that wouldn't happen, but then there were a lot of other problems of having all these other tracks below, which I don't really like. So this was the best solution. So sometimes I have to scroll up, but that's not really that big of a deal for me. The final track is again something I'm experimenting with. What this is again from my master out. It is always listening. So anytime I play some audio through any of these tracks, it will show up in the analyzers here. But these now are the same analyzers that go below here, or at least part of them. You can see the spectrum analyzer as well as those, again, analyzer third monitor that I talked about before. So this is not something I've used. This is again something I'm just experimenting with. Maybe I want this to go to a different track. Maybe I would like to have this on my reference track, and I can use the reference track there. But then again, at that point, you might as well have it on the reference track itself. So yeah, that's just something I need to play with, and there might be more updates coming through this as I get more and more, working on this template more and more. I'm always trying to experiment with new ideas and stuff like that. So this is an idea that's currently in my template. I'm still working with it, seeing if this is a better way to do that than below here on my master track. So I might keep it in like this, or I might change that again later. But for now, I'm just working with that and seeing if this is something that I like to have in my project. And that kind of leads me on to a lot of the why I do things. And the main reason is because it improves my workflow. So all of this organization, all of these groups that I have, all of the routing that I have, what it's meant to do is it gives me the right amount of options. So I have a lot of things that I can write down. I can make a lot of MIDI clips with notes, and I can record stuff, and I can have a sidechain trigger ready, and I have this whole routing group here, which isn't really needed. But what it allows me to do is, if I want to analyze the drums against the bass line, I don't have to set up anything. I can just open up this thing here. I can click this off, and I have just the drums and the bass, and I can play the drums that I want, and I'll be able to see the spectrum, I'll be able to see the waveform, I'll be able to see collisions, I'll be able to see the stereo, and have everything set up for that particular job. And there's like a 5% chance that I'm going to need it in any project. But if you're in that zone, if you're feeling inspired and you're making music, especially at the start when you're like making a kick and bass and you're really trying to get into a project that is fun to open up next time and isn't just a kick and bass, it's really important to have all your things already laid out for you, that you can be as fast as possible. So that's the reason why I have all of this stuff in there. Because as you can see, we have 16 tracks here of just stuff that is there as kind of auxiliary tracks, and then we have another 6 groups there. So if you look here, we have 22 tracks which are not there producing audio. They're just there taking up CPU space, right? Which for some people might be a lot, but for me, even though I have a very old computer and it's 7-8 years old at the moment, and it cannot handle all the projects that I throw at it, I haven't encountered a problem so severe with any project that I'm thinking like I need to sacrifice part of my workflow for that. Again, with these devices that you see here is another good example. Anytime I insert an audio track, it comes preloaded with an EQ utility and a compressor in sidechain mode, because that's something I so often use, that I just have it preloaded on the track, especially the EQ and the sidechain. So the reason this is obviously going to eat up CPU, especially if you're not using it. If you just have a whole bunch of tracks where there's an EQ doing nothing, a utility doing nothing, and a compressor doing nothing, that is still going to take up some CPU. But for me, not having that means that I'm going to need to spend maybe 40, maybe 50% of the time dragging those over, going into audio effects, scrolling up and down to get the effect that I want. If I want a utility, I have to scroll down. If I want to get a compressor or an EQ, I have to scroll up, right? I have to find it, I have to drag it over to the right track. Whereas if it's already on the track, it's just, okay, I want to cut the lows, I want to give it a little bit volume boost that it's not peaking, and then I want to set up a sidechain like this. Sidechain is already engaged, and now I already have a very basic mix down, right? So it's gain stage using this utility, which I use for gain staging. I have this EQ for like high passing, very small EQ tweaks, and I have a sidechain here. That's a very basic mixing thing, right? I might play with the width a little bit, although I like to use plugins for my stereo control. But you saw how quick that was. That is something that I can do in 30 seconds. So that saves me so much time by not having to drag over each individual plugin and say, okay, I need an EQ. Okay, I'll take out the low end. Okay, now I need to gain stage it, so I'll take out a utility, and it just saves a lot of time. And that time save is so important for me that I'm willing to sacrifice the CPU cycles that these things use when they're not in use. All right, so now I finally want to show you an actual project and go a little bit over some of the things that I've been doing there. All right, so here we have the project. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on here. This is a little bit more of a complex project. I'm not going to play it. If you want to hear it, it's on my Discord in the feedback channel. I've recently posted that this exact project in there. And so yeah, if you want to hear it, there it is. I won't bore you with the track itself, although I do think it's a very nice track. As you can see, this is still at the start of this template. I was still experimenting after I started this project. As you can see, not all the analyzers are here. This is in different order, and I believe there might not be a monitor track. Yeah, as you can see, the monitor track is so new that even in the last project that I started, it's not there yet. So I'm still experimenting with that. But what I wanted to show you mainly is how much use I make of this master record track. You can see not only have I recorded basically the whole song at this point, you can see there's all these little snippets here where I'm working on the kick and bass, and I'm just trying to, nail the kick and bass. And what I'll do is I'll just look at it, check at the waveform, see, okay, do I like this waveform? Does this look like something that sounds better or not? Does it actually sound better or not? Both using the audio that you hear from your speakers as well as visually looking at the waveform helps me to determine if something sounds nice or not. The second thing this allows me to do is just check on the dynamics of the track. Right, so already in the mixing stage, I'm worried about how the master is going to sound. As I said, I already have this mastered. If we look at this, you can see we have a master, including this thing that I talked about with Boost, where I'm already automating into the intro or into the break or whatever. So here you can see what I'm using this for is just to check like if this volume is okay throughout the intro, and then if the volume is okay in the actual drop. If at that point the track is nice and beefy like it is right here, like a nice limited track. If my fills aren't too loud, I usually want my fills to be a little bit lower in terms of volume, so that when the drop hits again, the next bit of energy comes in. So again, this is something where this waveform analyzing really comes into play for me. So this is what I mainly use that for. Again, here with the sidechain trigger, I can just show you how it's on every kick. Okay, so the way most people do their sidechaining is either directly from the kick, which I don't like because that's usually not the best idea. You usually want the transient heavy so that you can get a nice clean curve. But for people who work in MIDI, which I don't, as you can see, I like to work in audio so I can see the actual waveform of the kick, like in my playlist. What they do is they'll have their MIDI like set up like this, and then they'll have an instrument rack with a sampler, and you just go into the change and duplicate it, and in one of these you'll call this kick, and then in the other you set this to sidechain, and you should be able to just target this exact track here. So if I go into the compressor and just drop that on a different track, we should be able to target this specific channel within track number 99 here. You see right here, you can go to instrument rack sidechain post mixer, and what that will do is you will have one trigger for your kick. And the reason why that is useful, if you like put it there, you don't have to move your sidechain trigger. Right now, if I were to say, okay, I'm going to close this out, and I already have like a kick before here, right? To just have a little bit of a fill element. What I would need to do is I would need to open this up and then take the sidechain trigger and go there as well. Again, the way that I work and the reason why this particular workflow, even though it has this obvious negative thing, works better for me is because, one, I really like to be visual. I'm a very visual producer, so I like to see my waveforms more than I like to have that little bit of extra speed in terms of not having to move your sidechain trigger. And two, when I'm really producing, I'm not actually moving the sidechain trigger that much. What I usually do is I'll just have like a section of drums here. I'll just copy that over. Let's actually do that and copy that over like this. And it'll, the way I'm copying, because my kick is always on top, it'll already copy over with the sidechain trigger. So I don't really have to move anything. The only reason why I were to move something is if I delete everything here and then I said, okay, I do want a kick fill here. Maybe I want something cool like this. Let's just set something up. You can copy this kick fill if you want. It's a very basic rhythm. Then I would need to go in and actually put the sidechain trigger into place. Right, but as you can see, that was really quick. So again, it's not that much of a save, and it gives me the added benefit of being able to see the waveform as well as directly edit the waveform. So if I want this to only play in the first eighth note, I can like really dive into this with fades and try to really skew it the way I want it, really shape it the way I want. So that's very important to me as well, being able to do that, and much more important to me than being a little bit quicker with the sidechain trigger. So where I want to go with this is when you see me do all of these things, this is 2-3 years of me experimenting with different ideas, experimenting with different templates, with different workflows, with different things. And your template is probably going to look different. I am going to leave a download link for this template in the description if you want to check it out yourself and if you want to export yourself. But as I said, I've shown you most of the things and I've shown you most of the ideas of the things. So what I would, almost as an exercise for you, would recommend is that you make your own template, that you make a way for you to organize your project in such a way that everything that you want to do with your project, whenever you want, becomes faster. Because that's the actual reason why you would have a template. And even in a DAW like FL, which doesn't really have that capability like Ableton has, there's still some things that you can do so that when you open up FL Studio or when you open up Cubase, I don't know what the template capabilities are of Cubase, but for any DAW that has some kind of template capability like Ableton has, it is very important that your template and your workflow are like tailored towards each other, that your workflow is set up in a way that works well with your template, and that your template is created in such a way to empower your workflow. And that takes a lot of time, you know, getting used to your DAW, getting used to the way you produce is something that's not done overnight. So what I would recommend is test a lot of things out, see what works, see what you actually use in projects, make about 4 or 5 songs in a project that you've set up, in a template that you've set up, and just write down notes, write down what you do like about the things that you've set up, what you don't like about the things that you've set up, how you would organize your tracks differently, how you would structure your template differently, and all those things. You write those down, and then you go back to the drawing board, do another afternoon of just experimenting with what your DAW is capable of in terms of any template capabilities, and then you return, see if you like it better or not, and just from there you develop your template further and further. So yeah, that's going to be all the advice that I wanted to give, and it's as you can see, it's a little bit of a longer video than I planned. I planned for this to be a 20-minute video, but from the recording it's already over 40 minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Again, download link for the template is in the description. But that's it for now, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
In a very deep and bitter sense.